Beautiful morning. Today is Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to those of you who've served. Many of you may not know, but I served in the Navy for about almost 10 years. While I was in the Navy, I actually got to fly UAV drones, and that's kind of what got me into the whole concept of even thinking of flying drones to begin with. Not really anything like the drones that we fly, but the only real similar thing is we still crashed them. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. But overall, I had a great time serving this country, and I really appreciate everybody else who's also done the same. So yeah, happy Veterans Day, guys.
It's not that you open my heart, folding like a reptile, colder in the light. It's not that the agony starts to pull me like a riptide, pulsing in time. It's one by one, cut the circulation as the dust settles for you. Flood in the current will run, an eternal blue sun to illuminate our wounds. I wish my blood would slow down. And what's left of me, a cavity, at least the space is in my heart. It's where you left of me to die. I wish my blood would slow down. You can make my blood rush slow down. It's tight that consuming their hearts will soothe you like a brush fire, consuming on the incline. Not that the sediment stars to hold me like a sapphire, frozen in time. It's one by one, cut the circulation as the dust settles for you. Blood in the eyes will run in eternal blue.
So some of the benefits of Hypersmooth, I think, are one, that it's amazing for flow styles. If you've ever seen any of Slats or Ledrib or Bubby or Cricket, like, these pilots are insanely smooth and they just love to flow through obstacles, and I think Hypersmooth absolutely lends itself to that style of flying. They're constantly moving, and because they're constantly moving, just the way that it feels, like everything just links together, and that's the big deal about flow. That's how you flow, and Hypersmooth, again, is just perfect for that. Another nice benefit is that it hides any kind of tuning imperfections you might have in your quad. I know a lot of people don't really want to have to spend the time going through the deep tuning process of making their drones fly as clean as possible, so they'd rather just kind of slap some defaults on there, maybe some presets, and it may not be perfect, but it's definitely good enough. And if you're using Hypersmooth, you can't even tell the difference anyways. Along with that is also your little micro corrections, as in everybody who flies, they do little tiny things to kind of correct, you know, moving this way or that way, and using Hypersmooth will definitely kind of hide those things, so that's nice. If you do crash, this was a big one that I saw from Slat that he mentioned is why it's a good thing, is if you crash, I'm sure you've probably seen him crash in a few of his videos, and one of the coolest things is that he just gets back up and then keeps going, and it's amazing. More than likely, he probably had a bent prop that if he didn't have Hypersmooth on, like, you would notice it, and it would probably even maybe ruin the footage, but because he's using Hypersmooth, it still looks amazing, and it's so rad that he just keeps going. Like, that's a big deal about his style, and I really, really dig that. Another nice benefit is that it's cheaper than RSGo. Unless you're really big into doing cinematic, FPV footage and videos, then I don't really see the reason to have to spend the money on RSGo and use it. It's just easier to turn that Hypersmooth on, and then you go. Another one that I thought really liked was, I think this one's from Cricket. You paid for it, why not use it, right? That makes total sense. Like, this is a feature of the GoPro that you can use. Why aren't you using it? And yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And one of the biggest things that I can say honestly about Hypersmooth in my personal experience is that non-FPV pilots will generally love watching the footage a lot more. I've seen friends and family who will watch my other footage, the videos where I'm doing like kind of maybe more spangy or juicy styles, versus like Hypersmooth style of flying with flowing, and they will every single time they'll say, this looks so much better, I'd rather watch this, and the other stuff kind of makes my head hurt. So there's that benefit if you're trying to appeal to maybe a slightly bigger audience. So just a few benefits of not using Hypersmooth. For me, a big thing is just you get that slightly larger field of view, and I don't know why, but ever since I've seen it, it's like I can't unsee it now in my footage. Like I like having that nice large wide field of view, and it's just something I guess I prefer. It's totally up to you though. It's a preferred thing on your own accord. A big thing too is that once I stopped using Hypersmooth and I started to try to kind of fly without it, I noticed that my flying skills and my tuning on my drone was not really quite there. So it forces you to really work on your flying skill and especially your tuning skill of your drone. And I get it. A lot of people don't have time to sit there and tune. They'd much rather just be flying. And hey, that's totally fine. But I know that for me at least, once I kind of got into that aspect of the hobby, I definitely felt a lot more confident in my drone and its abilities and my own abilities. I was kind of able to push, and because I know my drone's going to react the way I want to, a lot of times if you watch my flying, I'm not afraid to send it because I know in a pinch I can make a quick micro correction that will get me out of trouble, because I know my drone will operate the way I expect it to. So I think tuning is a huge thing. And again, back to your flying skill, you're going to try to work on being a bit smoother at flying. Another thing is it's absolutely amazing for any type of fast styles of flying, such as spang. You know, you really want to kind of see that those movements that you're making that are really intentional, and with Hypersmooth on, you kind of lose that. So not using Hypersmooth, you do definitely get to see all those really nice, quick, intentional movements that you've been making. And it just kind of goes back to everything, wrapping it up, is that it's very consistent footage. You know, again, you're not going to see the field of view kind of getting cropped in and out. You're not going to see the props there 1 second and then not there the next second and be like, this is kind of weird, where are the props going? I know that sometimes happens to me, depending on the drone that I'm flying. If the props are kind of in the field of view and I'm trying to use Hypersmooth, you'll see them kind of go in and out. It just looks kind of weird. But yeah, you don't have to worry about that with NoHypersmooth. Just a few quick tips in regards to using Hypersmooth. I'm not going to go into crazy detail. There's plenty of videos online, on YouTube, and forums that you can read if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of why this is. But just understand that if you're going to be using Hypersmooth, using ND filters does have a bit of an impact. In fact, in some cases, a big impact. If you're using like ND32 filters and you're using a much lower shutter speed because of that, then the camera just can't do what it needs to do in order to process. It doesn't have enough footage there to process a smooth looking image. And because that's happening, your Hypersmooth isn't even going to look really good. So what most people will do is they won't even use an ND filter. They're going to go ahead and just put their shutter speed on auto. And that seems to have a much cleaner, much more smooth looking appearance to the footage than if you were to try to use ND filters and then try to set the shutter speed to what you want it. Just understand though that because it's on auto, what will tend to happen is you're going to get maybe less of that motion blur look, but some people might prefer that look. If you are the kind of person who likes to see good motion blur, it does tend to look a little bit more cinematic-like. And if you're that guy who wants to see the motion blur and the nice cinematic-looking footage, then I would recommend really probably going more towards like a real steady option rather than just Hypersmooth. And with that said, if you're somebody who's using Hypersmooth and you're like, well, I'm not really seeing this look really good because I'm using ND filters and slower shutter speeds, that's probably why. Because the Hypersmooth isn't really meant to work well with that type of settings. So understand too, if you're going to be changing your shutter speeds to higher shutter speeds, then you're going to want to adjust your ISO accordingly. If you leave it low on like 100, then it's going to look really dark. And I tend to like that look when I'm using an ND filter, because if not, it's a little too bright. If you try to bump it up to something higher like 800 or 1600, you're going to get a lot brighter footage. And that's kind of what I tend to use. I use about 800 when I'm trying to film at night. because it kind of allows more light to come in and it looks a little bit brighter. But know that if you're going too high on the ISO, you're going to start getting those little, what they call artifacts, which kind of like makes your footage look a little bit blocky, and it's clear that it's like a digital image rather than like an actual normal image. So here are my camera settings that I use on my GoPro Hero 8. I use ND8 filters, specifically the Ethics ones that actually glue to the front of the lens of the Hero 8. It's huge in protecting my screen or my lens. I've literally hit my GoPro head on multiple times, and I've never actually ever broken a lens, thank God. I've broken the ND filters a few times, but I'd much rather break those than breaking the lens on a Hero 8. So I suggest using something like that, if anything, just to protect your lens. I use 4K 30 FPS. I love the way 4K looks. You don't necessarily have to. Most people don't even watch anything in 4K, so it might be a little bit overkill, but I like watching my stuff on my big computer monitor at home sometimes when I'm just doing things in my office, so that's kind of why I like 4K more than others. I tend to always have my Hypersmooth off. If I do turn it on nowadays, I will definitely say I have it turned on, and I'll kind of adjust my settings accordingly. I use 1/120 shutter speed. This was a recommendation I saw from Jacuzzi J. I do like the look of motion blur, but because of the fact that I do fly really quickly, if you have too much motion blur, it kind of looks a little bit weird. Like everything doesn't look as sharp as it probably should because you're already moving so quick. Like the motion is so fast. It pretty much just handles it on its own without having to do the 180 rule. So yeah, I use 30 FPS with 1/20 and it works just fine in my opinion. I use a white balance of 5500K. A lot of people tend to kind of go with this white balance. It's probably one of the more natural looking white balance that you can use. You can either go warmer or less warm tones if you kind of change this up too much. My ISO I try to keep at 100 as much as I possibly can. On a really nice bright sunny day, this is perfect for me, and I like this because the image looks really crisp and clean. If you start to bump up your ISO too much, again, you're going to start getting those weird little artifacts in your footage, and you can see that it's clearly a digital image, and it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, so you want to be careful for that. And I might bump it up to about 400 depending see if it's like a cloudy day outside, without having to change any of my other settings. So I keep my sharpness on high. Some people say just leave it medium so you can kind of adjust it in post, but I'm lazy, so I just leave it on high all the time. And I leave my color flat. This is the easiest color setting to record in because you can kind of adjust your own colors however you want. You know, some of my footage you've probably seen or some of my videos where like the color is really vibrant and I chose to do it that way, or sometimes it's a little bit more natural. Either way, having a flat color profile is make it so it's much easier to edit later on in post.
And what's left of me, a